Intelligence has been highly regarded, not only in our current culture, but most nations over the course of history have valued geniuses. But where does this brilliance come from? Some people believe it comes from nature. An individual with good genes is smart because their ancestors were intelligent. Others believe genius comes from nurture, a result of a lifetime of hard work and a commitment to education. But sometimes, an ordinary child born into poverty will face an event that will change their life forever. A perfect storm of circumstances led to a savant in the scientific study of dinosaurs and fossil records. Unfortunately, history has, for the most part, forgot or the very least conveniently ignored the accomplishments of this paleontologist's incredible story. Whether it's because of her gender or social class, Mary Anning was never fully credited with most of her discoveries. For this reason, dinosaur hunter Mary Anning is a hidden gem of history. For the poor in Britain in 1799, life was exceptionally difficult. There were very few social programs to assist impoverished families. The Annings of Lyme Regis, England, had an even harder time than most. They defected from the Church of England to join a religious sect that would eventually become known later as the Congregationalists, meaning neither them nor their children could attend most schools, and were even barred from joining some professions. To make matters worse, having healthy kids was increasingly rare. Mary Anning was one of 10 children, but only she and her brother Joseph survived past the age of 5. Most of their other siblings died of diseases common for the time. Mary may have perished as a baby too, if it weren't for a rather strange bit of happenstance. One day, a neighbor and 2 other women were watching the 15-month-old outside one day. They were under a tree and enjoying a horse show when lightning struck the elm, killing all 3 women immediately. Witnesses rushed to Mary's aid, took her home, and cared for her. Amazingly, she sustained no injury. In fact, her parents regard this event as the moment when Mary changed for the better. She was not well up until that point, but from then on, she rapidly developed great social skills, was curious about the world, and developed a high aptitude for knowledge. Her parents were unfortunately unable to nourish her with proper education. Her learning consisted of Sunday school and whatever theological magazine or book was available from her father. One helpful thing Richard did teach young Mary was how to collect fossils from the cliffs of her coastal town. Mr. Anning would gather the artifacts and sell them to tourists. He, as well as everyone else, didn't know that these funny-looking rocks, which were called curios at the time, I assume short for curiosities, were evidence of ancient creatures. Richard died before he learned just how valuable those rocks really were. It didn't take very long for Mary to begin her work. At the age of 12, Mary was out collecting at the cliffs with her older brother Joseph when she discovered a partial skeleton of an ichthyosaur, an ancient fish that lived over 100 million years ago. Mary was the first to find the remains of the Jurassic creature. She dug up the full skeleton a year later and sold it for 23 British pounds, which is worth over $1,000 today if converted to modern US dollars. The collector who displayed the skeleton was very unaware of what he had. He labeled the find as a crocodile in fossil state. It may be hard to believe, but people of this age didn't know that animals went extinct. The average citizen thought the animals living were all there had ever been. No more, no less. This was based on the widely accepted idea that the Earth was only a few thousand years old, according to the highly literal interpretation of the creation story found in the Bible. Shortly after the ichthyosaur discovery, Mary fully took over the family business of hunting and collecting fossils. Her brother's schedule had become too busy, mostly booked by his apprentice work in an unrelated profession of upholstery. There were some finds, but none as notable as her first. In an act of sympathetic charity, a regular patron by the name of Thomas James Birch decided to help the family the best he could. He auctioned off all the fossils he had already bought from the Annings, donating the proceeds to the family. The Birch auction was greatly successful. The items secured enough to allow the Annings to pay rent and have some financial security. This propped up Mary enough to establish her own shop named Anning's Fossil Depot. With the addition of a brick-and-mortar store, the paleontologist began to gain momentum with her discoveries. Mary was the first person to unearth a complete plesiosaur in 1823, which is an aquatic dinosaur. A few years later, she found the first British example of a pterosaur, which is similar to a pterodactyl. And in 1829, she found the remains of a squala raja, an ancient fish. Stressing accuracy and attention to detail as to how actually the fossil was presented when first found. Despite all her hard work, Mary was rarely credited with the excavation and discovery work she did when the fossils were displayed in museums or private exhibitions. You would be hard-pressed to find an example where her name was even mentioned in most exhibits, nor was she invited to attend these ceremonies. It's unclear if she was redacted because of her status or her gender. Many ancient discoveries were first made by laborers, but the credit would often go to more prominent citizens that could afford to display the artifact. No one could deny the intellect she possessed, and those in the scientific community that were aware of her talents sought out her expertise again and again. In her teens, Mary befriended Henry de la Beche. They scoured the cliffs together for fossils. Henry would later become a renowned paleontologist and geologist. Another fossil hunter was an Oxford professor by the name of William Buckland. He was a colleague of Mary's and often spent his vacations in Lyme. They did more than just dig. Buckland and Anning would often discuss, analyze, and hypothesize different theories surrounding the mysteries of these animals they were uncovering. My favorite story of these two is that once Mary suggested that the small, roundish objects found alongside the skeletons she collected were feces of the long-deceased lifeform. In other words, Mary was the first person to discover dinosaur poop. Childish, I know, but her suggestion was later confirmed by Buckland, and ultimately the Oxford gentleman was the one to present the hypothesis to other esteemed scientists. I'm sorry, I just can't get the image out of my mind of overly serious Brits talking about poop for hours, maybe even days at a time. For Mary Anning, this was no laughing matter. She was doing the dirty work of paleontology and received none of the fame, accolades, or capital that she justly deserved, despite risking her life on several occasions. Part of the reason her father died back in 1810 was due to an injury suffered on the cliffs where the Annings obtained their inventory for sale to tourists. He fell from the height of the shale shore and never recovered. Mary nearly met a similar fate one day on the edge of the English Channel. One day, when she was searching for fossils, something caused the rock formation to shift, and a landslide ensued, tragically killing her longtime companion, her dog Trey. The collapse nearly killed her as well, falling just a couple of feet next to her. You would think, with all that Mary risked, the blood, sweat, and tears she put into her endeavors, you'd think, at the very least, she deserved some respect for what she accomplished. Alas, after Anning died at the age of 47 from cancer, slowly the world began to forget all about the influential paleontologist. Her fame was only recently appreciated around the turn of the century. In 1999, a large gathering of paleontologists, fossil hunters, and historical admirers of Anning's work met in her hometown of Lyme Regis. They honored her 200th birthday together. The girl who was struck by lightning became the woman that helped spark the change in how we view dinosaurs, extinction, and humanity's time on Earth. The ripples of impact Mary Anning had continue to be felt to this day, even if you are just hearing her name for the first time. Mary Anning is a hidden gem of history. If you have someone in mind who you think should be highlighted as a hidden gem of history, or just want to learn about an undervalued time in history, feel free to email the show at hiddengemsofhistory@gmail.com with your suggestion. Hidden Gems of History could not be made without the help of so many people. This episode especially could not be made without the Lyme Regis Museum. The institution was built on the Anning's old estate, and is now a multi-million-dollar facility honoring her legacy. If you were to visit the museum, you would be able to walk where Mary once walked, and, even more exciting, collect your own fossils. Who knows, maybe you'll even discover the next dinosaur on your visit to Lyme. Be sure to be on the lookout for the theatrical release of the film Ammonite, detailing Mary Anning's life. The film should be released either 2020 or 2021, and will star Kate Winslet as Mary. I'm Matt Dahlberg, and thanks for joining me on Hidden Gems of History.